Last year, I reviewed the ever so popular Acer Aspire 5 2021 model. At that time, it was rocking the latest specifications by Intel. Well, fast forward a full year, and we now have the latest edition of Acer's Aspire 5, the 2022 edition, and you guessed it, it's rocking the latest internals available this year. So this guy has the 1260p i7 processor, meaning it's got Intel's 12th gen technology. It does have 12 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. It also has Intel's integrated Iris Xe graphics, a 500 gigabyte solid state drive. We do have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth technology on board. Additionally, this is the 15-inch variant with a full HD non-touch captive screen. And just like last year, there's a lot to talk about here. This laptop really has some interesting aspects to it, and it's been completely redesigned for this year. So hopefully you're as excited as I am to review this thing. Let's get started. The Aspire 5 comes in some pretty standard cardboard packaging, so you do have some basic Acer branding, and that's about it. Now, once you remove the content seal and proceed to actually opening the box itself up, inside you'll find a few things. Firstly, the instruction manual, warranty information, regulation information, all that essential paperwork. Past that, we have the laptop itself and a ton of protective packaging. Remove all of that, and here we have the redesigned Aspire 5 for 2022, but more on that in a quick minute. We also have this miserable 65-watt charging adapter, and the reason I say that is because it still comes with that terrible proprietary pin. Seriously, Acer, it's 2022, just put a USB-C port on there or connection on there. You also, of course, have the basic wall outlet charging cable piece, and that's pretty much everything for the unboxing. This year's model has definitely improved over last year's build quality. So you do have a semi-metallic build or exterior chassis, but not only that, the laptop feels more rigid, more sturdy, and more solid compared to last year's model. And last year's model by itself, by the way, is pretty decent as well. Now, it is heavier as well. At 3.9 pounds, this thing definitely has a fair bit of weight for a 15-inch laptop, but again, the build quality justifies it for the most part. Now, starting off with the top side, like I mentioned, you do have a nice textureless, smooth, metallic finish. It really does feel nice and premium, and it's also pretty fingerprint resistant as well. You will notice Acer has considerably shrunk their branding this time. It's just located in small fonts at the top centerpiece. I/O port diversity on the Aspire 5 isn't half bad, to be honest with you. So you do have that dedicated charging port. Next to that, you actually have a Ethernet jack, which is quite nice, a fully loaded HDMI 2.1 port, two USB-A super speed ports, one of which supports reverse charging capabilities, a Thunderbolt 4 USB-C port. On the other side, you have one more USB-A super speed port. You also have a headphone jack. Now, you don't get a SD card reader, but all things considered, this setup isn't all that bad. It's actually pretty nice. The bottom of the laptop has a hard TPU or plastic finish. Now, what I find really interesting is that you have three entire rows of linear air intake vents, but the vast majority of these vents are actually shut closed and just there for aesthetics. It's such a weird design choice. You'll also notice you have two speaker grills, one on either side, which indicates this is in fact a bottom firing speaker setup. Unfolding this laptop presents you with an ample amount of palm rest space, which I think is sufficient for most hand types. Now, with that said, you also have a decently large sized trackpad, and unlike last year, there are noticeable improvements. So while there still is a limited amount of flex, it's well within the threshold of a mid-range laptop, and generally speaking, clicking feels like a high quality and tactile experience. You'll also notice, just like last year, the fingerprint scanner is still integrated on the top side of the trackpad. The keyboard we have here, while not industry leading, is respectable in its own rights. So you have a decent amount of surface area per keycap, minimizing any chances of typos, but you'll also find the keystrokes are decent. While the keyboard does have a bit of a more soft feel to it, it still feels tactile and doesn't feel finicky or cheap in the slightest. Unfortunately, you do have a rather compressed 10 keypad, which is honestly unnecessary since it had so much space on the sides. But past that, you'll also notice you do have a fully backlit keyboard, which of course is nice to have. Directly above the keyboard, of course, is where you have the hinge, but before we get to that, you'll notice you have the air exhaust vent located directly beneath the screen, which honestly is such a poor engineering choice. I mean, having all that hot air exhausted directly onto the LCD screen, yeah, not a great idea. With that said, the hinge quality on the other side is actually pretty decent. So there's a very limited amount of wobble. The hinge feels tight, sturdy, and solid. It's definitely designed to last for the foreseeable future, which is a good thing. Now, as far as the display fitting goes, you'll notice you have a relatively thick chin, but you do have Acer branding, so cool stuff. You have relatively narrow bezels on either side, which are more or less in line with 2022 standards. Now you have a moderately thin forehead, and in the center of that is where you have a 720p webcam, which honestly looks about as average as the rest of them. Acer figured they've already cheaped out in a few places, what's a little bit more? And they decided to cheap out on the display inevitably, of course. Well, things start off pretty well, so you do have a standard resolution of Full HD or 1080p, which equates to a 16:9 aspect ratio. You also have a standard 60Hz refresh rate. The good news is that you do have a IPS panel with excellent viewing angles. It's wide, it's easy to look at, that's all good. But things fall apart from there on. So in terms of color accuracy, you only have 56% sRGB, which makes it literally the same as last year's model. Colors look bland. It's not a great choice for people who rely on a high degree of color accuracy. But things only get worse from there on. This laptop only has a peak brightness of 260 nits. While in most indoor settings that will be sufficient, but if you are using it in a very well lit room or outdoors, yeah, that glare is going to definitely overcome your screen. Performance in the Aspire 5 has improved to some degree, but still has some of the problems you saw with previous generation models. So day-to-day performance like web browsing, watching videos on the internet, or crunching up a Word document are super fast and flashy. Even moderately intensive activities like coding, for example, are pretty good thanks to the power of that 12th Gen i7 chip. Even more demanding activities like 4K video editing, for example, is still very much a plausible experience on this device, which actually wasn't all that possible on last year's model. So good stuff there. Now, as far as gaming goes, unfortunately, Acer really hasn't improved the experience here, even for casual gaming. Games like Counter-Strike Go still frequently have frame drops, they lag. It's not a great experience, especially when compared to a lot of the competition that has similar configurations. Part of the poor gaming experience comes down to a simple factor: thermals. So under a theoretical peak load, this laptop can hit an average surface temperature of 47 degrees Celsius, which is uncomfortably hot for a laptop like this. But even under more realistic sustained loads, you can still hit upwards of 42 degrees Celsius, which again is not a great temperature to be at when compared to a lot of other laptops with similar configurations and sizes. As far as fan noise goes, it's loud. You can hit noise levels upwards of 50 decibels, which is well into gaming laptop territory. But not just that, the fans frequently go on. They'll use any occasion they can to hit max RPM. Even the simple act of browsing the web is enough to trigger them. Battery life is somewhat disappointing on this laptop, so you'll get about 8 hours on a single charge. That includes at 50% brightness levels, doing activities like web browsing, watching some videos on YouTube, having the speakers at around 40% volume. Now, of course, it's going to vary depending on your use case, but it's definitely below average. Now, with that said, speakers aren't all that bad on this laptop. They're not great, but that dual speaker setup definitely is loud enough to give you the immediate surrounding noise levels you would want, but unfortunately, the fan noise definitely gets in the way of that as well. Have a quick listen for yourself.
Everything is coming all together at once. I want a good life, good nights, good friends, alright. Make a couple dollars from something I love to do right. Live my young life, grow old with some memories. Living each day with a good vibe energy. Tell me what you want, just take a thought and make it happen. The only way to live up in this life is with some passion. Don't let this life just pass you by. Get up and take some action. Just tell me what you want, go take a thought and make it happen.
Priced at $850 for this configuration, the Aspire 5 definitely is a mid-range laptop, but in return you get a number of things. So you have what I consider to be dramatically improved exterior build quality, with the whole laptop just feeling more premium and sturdy in general. On top of that, you'll also appreciate the fact that you have a respectable trackpad and keyboard and essential features like a fingerprint scanner and a dual speaker stereo setup. Now, some of the things that are holding holding this laptop back include its lackluster battery life and high thermals, which still continue to be a problem in 2022, and Acer's made very little effort to actually improve that aspect of this device. But despite all that, it still performs pretty well, and it is one of the first mid-range laptops out there rocking Intel's 12th gen hardware. There's only a handful of other laptops that have this right now. If you are looking for a laptop, however, that can squeeze the most performance with this configuration, both HP's Pavilion series and Lenovo's IdeaPad 3 series do have a slight advantage in that regard. But other than that, this is a great general productivity machine. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this review. Make sure you hit that like button and sub to our channel if you enjoyed the content. It genuinely helps us grow and means the world to us. Thank you for watching.